Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT How to Play video. Today our analyst will be diving into how to play Leblanc Assassin for patch 11.9. This is the first of many how to play videos for the newly released Set 5. At the moment in the meta there are quite a few builds to play, such as Aphelios, Invokers, Redeemed, and of course, Leblanc Assassins. This composition has risen quickly as it gained a lot of traction at the tail end of the PBE testing and has slowly caught on since Set 5 was released. With all that said, let's go ahead and dive on in. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. There's a lot of aspects to cover for this composition, but let's begin by covering core items. For the most part in Set 5, a lot of champions and compositions don't require too many specific items. With the shadow item system, there's another layer of flexibility. But for the Leblanc Assassin composition, you do need specific components or the build will fall flat once you hit the mid and late game. As the name of the composition implies, Leblanc is the main carry. This means prioritizing items for her should be your goal early on. The two key items you will need for Leblanc are Very Dark Blue buff and Guardian Angel. The reason for this is with the Dark Blue buff item, once Leblanc gets below 60%, she'll gain 50 mana after casting, which leads to her constantly spamming her ability. And her ability stuns, so you can likely see where this ends up snowballing a fight. Guardian Angel is there to help Leblanc stay alive long enough in a fight to get to the point where Dark Blue buff kicks in. The revive not only prevents her from being one-shot, but nearby enemies will drop targeting on Leblanc while she's reviving. Then she comes back and begins spamming her chains again. In order for Leblanc to properly carry like this, it does mean you'll be playing a weaker version of the composition if you're unable to secure both Dark Blue buff and Guardian Angel. It can be played with the regular blue buff, but it's not nearly as strong and requires you to run Coven all game to keep Leblanc relevant in fights. Guardian Angel, on the other hand, is not negotiable, though Fallen Guardian Angel can be used if you only have a regular blue buff. But keep in mind, you don't want both shadow variations of those items together on Leblanc, as Fallen Guardian Angel revives with over 60% health, which nullifies the benefit of Dark Blue buff. And that's really it for items for this composition. Others to consider for Leblanc are Infinity Edge for increased damage and criticals, Death Cap, or even Archangels. None of them are required, as the core two are Dark Blue buff and Guardian Angel. For the rest of the composition, the items are quite flexible. Morellonomicon or the shadow variation are great on Morgana, which can also be given to Volibear. Viego, Nocturne, and Katarina can all be secondary carries, so look to give them some of the leftover items. Chalice is a great item for Diana to slightly increase her starting mana, plus it buffs Leblanc. The last bit to talk about is the beginning carousel. Tier's the best option, so you have it right away and can fish for a shadow tier later. Sword is also good, as you can use multiple swords for Guardian Angel and Infinity Edge. And if you're unable to secure either of those components, a rod is the third best option, as you can make an early Morello with it. With items covered, let's move on to core champions and traits. As we've already stated, the primary carry is Leblanc. Using her as a basis, you have multiple boards you can play her in, but the core runs at least 4 Assassin and 3 Revenant. Those champions are Leblanc, Diana, Nocturne, and Viego for the Assassins, with Ivern and Volibear as the 2 remaining Revenants. This baseline composition gives you at least 2 more champions you can add. The standard variation for Leblanc are either 6 Assassin, 3 Revenant, or 4 Assassin, 3 Revenant, 3 Coven. The 6 Assassin variation is easy, as you can add in Katarina and Kha'Zix. If you have the Assassin Spatula item, you can also use it to turn any champion into an Assassin, but it's really not necessary. The Coven variation is currently one of the most common because it has a mid-game power spike, and it doesn't rely as much on hitting Dark Blue buff for Leblanc. Using the Coven leader on Leblanc helps her cast more often in the fight, which ends up mimicking the effects of Dark Blue buff. Whether you're playing Coven or 6 Assassin, the mid-game for both is going to revolve around Coven, as you're unlikely to hit all the necessary champions for 6 Assassins until level 8. And those are the 2 main variations of Leblanc Assassin. Which variation you play and stick with depends entirely on the items you have and how well your early and mid-game go. The strength of this composition should hit during the mid-game, which often leads to an easy fast 9 where you can add in all the 5 costs you want. You can also use that lead to slow roll for Leblanc 3, though avoid doing so if someone is contesting, as Leblanc 3 is not necessary for winning with this build. Before we move on, let's talk about transitions you make from playing Leblanc Assassins. If it looks like you're not hitting all the necessary champions by level 7 on stage 4, you can pivot into other blue buff builds. Karma works well, as does Vel'Koz with dark blue buff. Karma can also be given Morello if you've made it by that point of the game. Or if you get lucky and can hit either an early Heimer or Teemo, you can also use those two as a carry. So the two easiest transitions from a mid-game Coven LeBlanc board is either Invokers or Vel'Koz with Redeemed. Of course, there's a lot of other potential transitions, but those two pivots are the easiest to make based on the items you've already made. Let's move on and talk about each stage of the game, beginning with the early game. After the beginning carousel, the overall goal is to find early Coven if possible, otherwise play for champions that use tiers like Ziggs or Lissandra. Definitely play the strongest board you can, but wait to level until after you see what items you're given on the 2/2 armory. If you aren't given the option of a shadow tier, then you want to lose the next 2 rounds. The reason for this is that you want early priority on the carousel. Now, this doesn't mean full open and take a bunch of damage, but scout around and get an idea of how strong everyone's boards are. If it looks like your board is too strong, pull a few units off for 1-star units. The goal is to lose the round enough to drop to first or second pick, but not throw away too much health. It's a fine line to walk, but if you play enough, you'll get a good grasp on how to play it. On the other hand, if you do get the shadow tier from the armory, then you're in a great position to play LeBlanc. Ideally, you'll be able to find LeBlanc early if you do try to have another assassin in with her, plus any strong frontline like Cavaliers or Brawlers. A specific early game board that does well is Kha'Zix, LeBlanc, Gragas, and another Brawler. This gives you a frontline Dawnbringer for Gragas and Kha'Zix plus Assassin for LeBlanc. And of course, if you do hit early Coven, play those champions right away. Beyond the early rounds of Stage 2, there's not much to worry about as the build is relatively simple to play. Buy Coven units when you can and try to have at least one assassin with LeBlanc. Lastly, for the early game, if you're unable to find either dark blue buff or regular blue buff, you may want to consider pivoting later on. You still have another armory and carousel before level 7, but keeping your options open at this point is important. As we move into Stage 3, let's talk about the mid game. This is where LeBlanc begins to shine. Once you hit level 6, which will be around 3-2, you may need to roll a little bit to try to find LeBlanc 2 or Coven. Don't spend a lot on level 6 as the main roll down for this composition is at level 7, but if your board is too weak, you may want to roll for a few upgrades. In general, you want at least 2 assassins and Coven during Stage 3, but playing your strongest board at this point still takes precedence. Don't weaken your board with a bunch of 1-stars if you're already winning, for example. Instead, keep building up your economy and work towards level 7. On 4-1 after Wolves, you will level to 7 and roll. This is where the mid-game composition should come online with at least 4 assassins, 3 Coven, and hopefully an Ivern for Revenant. If not Ivern, any additional frontline works fine, such as Rel. But the goal when rolling on 7 is to form your core mid-game composition and hit at least LeBlanc 2 and Morgana 2. This will give you a solid frontline and damage dealer. The next few rounds should be aimed at stabilizing your board if you're still losing rounds, meaning rolling to upgrade your existing champions. And if you find Volibear or Viego, definitely play them right away. But at this point of the game, your board should be strong enough to put you on a win streak or at least winning most of your rounds. This is where you have a decision to make. Either you can stay on level 7 and slow roll for LeBlanc 3, or you can push towards level 8 and 9 and look for late game champions and the 6 assassin board. If you've been hitting a lot of extra LeBlancs, it's not a bad idea to stick with slow rolling, though make sure you're scouting to see how contested the build is. But you can always wait a few rounds during Stage 4 to see how the lobby is playing out. How strong is the rest of the lobby? What health is everyone at? Are you winning every round during Stage 4? Finding the answer to these questions is the best way to determine how you should proceed. In general, if you're on a win streak and have a lot of health, leveling and playing for a fast 9 is a surefire way to place high. LeBlanc 3, while strong, is not an instant win for this composition and depends a lot on how strong the rest of the lobby is. Whichever decision you make, you want to have decided on the path you're going to take by Raptors. And with that, we can move into Stage 5 and the late game. Overall, LeBlanc Assassins is a composition that peaks during Stage 3, 4, and parts of Stage 5. The reason is that the power spike of LeBlanc 2 with Coven begins to fall off once players are hitting their 4-cost carries and putting together strong endgame boards. This will vary game to game as LeBlanc can carry you to a first. Just keep in mind that once you're hitting Stage 5, the value of your composition is going to be lower than other players. The way to increase your board's value is by leveling to 8 and then 9. If the rest of the lobby is a bit too strong, you may end up stuck at level 8, which you should level to somewhere between 5-1 and 5-3. At level 8, your goal is to find Diana, Ivern, Volibear, and Viego while 2-starring the rest of your board. You can either stick with Coven at this point, or you can transition into 6 Assassin. Keep in mind 6 Assassin, while strong, does require a bit of high rolling as you need both Viego and Volibear, and ideally one of them to be upgraded. If you've been winning a lot during Stage 4 and into Stage 5, you can play for a Fast 9. Fast 9 makes it way easier to hit Viego and Volibear while opening the door to other 5-cost champions such as Kindred and Heimerdinger. You can even pivot into an entirely late game focused composition if you want, depending on how lucky your rolls are at level 9. As for when to level to 9, there's no specific round, just do so when you're able to and you still have gold left over to roll. The win condition for Leblanc Assassin is hitting Viego 2 and Volibear 2. Those 2 champions will help push your board strength high enough to compete with other late game boards. Leblanc is still relevant at this point of the game, but you need the other champions to thin out the enemy's board so that she can stay alive long enough to perma-cast her ability. If you've re-rolled for Leblanc 3, it's a lot easier for Leblanc to carry, but you still need at least Volibear 2 if you want to place in the top 2 consistently. The last portion of the game is positioning, which is really not that difficult for this build. The main concern is making sure Leblanc is jumping to the very back hex, as you don't want her stuck in a clump of units. Try to position Diana and Volibear against clumps of units to get the most out of their AoE, and lastly, you can look to position Viego on the sides to try and snipe the enemy carry. And that's all for today, folks. Leblanc Assassin is continuing to rise to the top of the meta due to how easy it is to play and how strong it can be in the mid game. But there are plenty of other viable options in the meta, so don't limit yourself to one build. Let us know in the comments section below what build you've been climbing with. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.